Hello everyone, welcome to Introducing Self-Service Alerting Part 2. This is part of a series of presentations around SQL Server Business Intelligence and SQL Server 2012, describing some of the new capabilities we're bringing to the market with this new release. My name is Łukasz Pawłowski. I'm a Senior Program Manager in the Reporting Services team, and it's really a privilege for me to be describing self-service alerting. This is a project that over the last 2 years I've worked on, and it's really nice to be able to see customers being able to start deploying it and getting the benefits. As a reminder, this is part 2. If you want high-level framing information and a high-level demo of what alerting is and how you can use it, go watch part 1. This talk is going to be much more about the individual details and the architecture rather than going through demos. Okay? And part 3 is going to have some demos more tailored towards IT admins and some foundational content around data feeds. So come back for that if you're looking for demos. Let's dive into it. So we're going to talk about feature set, and we're going to talk about the alerting architecture as part of this talk. First, for those of you who haven't been with us before, let's go ahead and take a look at a very important aspect, which is where we are within the overall stack. Now, self-service alerting is part of our overall Microsoft Business Intelligence portfolio. As part of that portfolio, we have reporting services, and we come within SQL Server 2012. We've made several major investments as part of our reporting and alerting story. The first is around empowering users. This is the ability for information workers to create stunning visualizations in highly interactive way with the data that they have created in Power Pivot models, whether those are models created as part of Excel and saved into SharePoint, or as part of the new ability to host those in analysis services as a professional tabular model. Also, we increased the efficiency of our IT deployments and made our SharePoint integration very, very seamless in 2012. I'm going to talk about that in this presentation at a very, very small level, as much as I really need in order to provide understanding. But there's going to be a separate presentation around this in a much more detailed manner that we'll talk about later. Where we're going to focus today is on proactive intelligence. This is the ability for information workers to create alerts on data that matters to them. So when an information worker is going and viewing a operational report, they're able to create alert rules that will then send them an email message when that rule has been satisfied. And of course, this is all through SharePoint. So let's dive into some of the details. At this point, if you haven't already watched part 1, I would highly recommend that you do that so that some of this detailed functional content will be more interesting. So let's do the feature drill down. What I want to do here is I want to run through the individual features within alerting and make sure we go through them and call out specific things that you should know for the future as you start deploying self-service alerting. So let's start with alert rules. Now, when we decided to design alerts, we could have targeted them at a number of different audiences. We could have gone with IT professionals who are really trying to build alerts for organizations and push alerts out to wide distribution lists based off of targeting data, based off of role, and so on and so forth. We could have built automated systems so that you could have a line of business applications that generate alerts based off of line of business workflows and so forth. But where we focused was information workers and building a productivity rule for information workers. And so we built alert rules that are very, very simple. It's extremely easy and fast to create alerts. I think this really speaks to the kind of problems we're trying to solve with alerting around giving information workers a safety net for how to handle information overload so they don't miss critical information, and the ability to really tailor alerts to their specific role and make themselves more productive. So we provide the ability, of course, to create to compare data within the report against either a static threshold. So the example here is alert me when order date is after 6/1/2011. right? So that's, imagine I'm waiting for an order to be submitted, and if it doesn't come in after that particular point in time, there might be some risk to getting that fulfilled for the customer that I'm really trying to close a deal with. So that gives me the ability to create a very important kind of rule. We also allow the ability to create dynamic thresholds. So this is the example is, alert me when completed date is after due date. So this allows me, if I'm managing a project, for example, to maintain an awareness of where my team is, who's struggling to meet their deadlines, and who might need some help. So that then I can either help that individual, and also I can describe to my management where my project is and what the challenges we're facing. Now, underneath the covers, what we try to do is there's lots of data and reports, but we try to keep things very straightforward for information workers. And so what we've done is we've mapped all of the different kind of data types to essentially 3 different data types. You either have a string, a number, or a date time. And that provides a very simple experience for information workers, and they don't have to go and do any kind of conversions or any kind of expressions on their data. The last thing to note here is that alert rules are case insensitive. Now the reason is that we want to make sure that alerts are very forgiving for information workers to create. The goal is to have information workers come into the alerting experience, create an alert extremely quickly, and have confidence that that alert will fire when it's needed. And so alert rules are case insensitive, so that things happen. Alert rules are case insensitive, so that the comparisons happen correctly for most scenarios. The second piece to talk really about is alert scheduling options. So when an alert executes, it executes on a schedule. So the information worker provides a schedule. What we'll do when the schedule happens is we'll go run the alert, and what that means is we'll run the report, we'll go evaluate the rules against the data contained in that report, and then we'll potentially send you an email if those rules match. Now the schedules here are very straightforward. It's daily, weekly, hourly, and minute. We expect most information workers to use daily and weekly, and relatively few to use hourly and minute. We actually would recommend against using minute too often. It's not really the intent to have kind of like real-time alerts, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we also have some advanced options around scheduling. So we have start and end dates, and this really allows you to align the alerts execution with your project that you're running as an information worker. Sometimes projects have deadlines, and then the actual project ends. So you want to be able to have your alerts be time specific, or maybe when there's an important deadline, you want an alert to run starting within a couple of weeks of that deadline. So you'll be able to provide those dates. The last thing is this ability to have dynamic message delivery. So this is the ability for us to know that the data that that came from the report has not changed. So you might be running an alert maybe weekly, but every week the rule is yes, the rule matches, but the data hasn't fundamentally changed. And so there's no point to receiving that alert potentially. Some people will want to get that, some people won't. By default, we have this option selected that it says, if there's a duplicate, we won't send you the duplicate. And you can uncheck that option, but it's important to realize that by default, we'll just go ahead and send you the data when it changes, rather than continually sending you the data if it even hasn't changed. The next thing to say is around alert messages. Alert messages are in our SQL Server 2012 release come in emails. And the overall format of that message is static. You're not able to design that. But it allows information workers to create alerts very quickly as a result. Now, some important pieces of information are available in the alert message that allows information workers to be very proactive once they receive an alert message. First, on behalf of. It tells them, the information worker, who sent them that alert. Most cases, information workers will create alerts for themselves. Sometimes they will create alerts targeting a team of individuals. And it's important then to know who's sending you that message, and so that you can click that on behalf of link, which will be a mail to link. You'll be able to respond to that person saying, yes, I got this, I understand what's going on. Maybe you could help me understand why you sent me this alert, and so forth. There's a subject and description. This, of course, allows you to do 2 things. One is allows you to distinctly identify the alert within your mailbox. The second one is allows you to either provide crib notes for yourself so that you're able to remember what you're supposed to do with that alert once you receive it. Or the same for the other recipients. Maybe if you're creating an alert to send to a broader group so that they can remember what to do with that alert. The second thing is alert results. So this is the actual data that triggered the alert, so that you don't have to go looking for the report or looking through an entire report to find out which rows are the ones that are the important rows. You get to see exactly what they are within the alert message. Next is the alert rules. This is a text description of all of the rules you use to create the alert. Oftentimes, when people receive alerts on data, they don't know how that rule or how that data was determined. And so this allows you to be able to clearly communicate to someone or to just remind yourself what what conditions caused that alert to happen. Next is report parameters. Now, when you create an alert, you view the report within the report viewer. And if you used parameters, those parameters you use to view the report are automatically used to run the alert. In the alert message, we will tell you what the report parameters were so that you can remember what they were. And next is the report link. This is the link over to the actual report. So if you'd like to go view the data as it is immediately, you can go ahead and view that. The next thing to say is that alerts do allow multiple recipients, and this allows you to share alerts with others. Now, this is really intended at information workers to help each other. So, for example, a manager sending alerts to their direct team. It's not intended to meet IT's ability to push alerts to information workers. You know, IT has a lot of different kinds of alerts that they send out. I, for example, receive a lot of infrastructure alerts. This server is slow, or this or that's going on. Oftentimes, those don't really meet my needs as an information worker. Now, for this capability within SQL Server 2012, we haven't really designed for that scenario. We really wanted to help information workers get their own work and be more productive. So if you do try to use this feature to meet the IT's ability to push alerts to information workers, you will find that there's some limitations you'll run into, so we don't recommend that. Next, let's talk a little bit about how we handle international customers and how we handle the data that we all have to deal with. So first off, alerts are localized into 22 languages. And the way this works is when you view SharePoint, a site within SharePoint has a particular language or a particular culture. So if I go into my SharePoint and I see a French SharePoint, the alerting experience for creating alerts and managing them will be in French. When I receive an alert message created on that site, it will also be in French, right? And so that means that you get a very consistent experience across all of your interactions with the SharePoint site and with the alerts generated from that SharePoint site. The alert rules are evaluated using the client's culture, and what that means is that when you type in, a decimal a decimal separator that's culture specific, a comma or a period, we'll respect that when we interpret how that data and evaluate the rules. The next thing to talk about is permissions and security. So when we go and we create alerts, not everyone can create alerts. It's only the people who have the right permissions within SharePoint to actually create alerts. And the permission is actually called the create alert permission. We're reusing the built-in SharePoint permission for this, and that allows very easy management within the overall organization. So you don't have to go as a SharePoint site admin and change all of your groups. Everything is just already provided by default. And then you can go and customize that. And you can set that create alert permission either on an individual report or on a document library or at the site level. So you can customize that to meet your needs. Now, managing alerts happens based off of the manage alerts permission. And that's a permission that sits at the site level in the hierarchy owners group by default. Now, what that means is that you're able to define who the users who can just simply create alerts for themselves and manage their own, as well as the users who can manage alerts for the entire site. Now, because management is at the site level, it actually reduces the overall effort that someone who's a SharePoint Central admin user would have in order to manage the overall deployment, which is great. Now, lastly to say is that alerting supports operational reports, but only operational reports that have stored credentials data sources. And so what that means is that, if you have reports that use interactive Windows integrated security, those reports are not going to be able to be alerted on. Great. So now we talked a little bit about the features for alerting. Let's talk now about the alerting architecture. And in this part, I'm going to give a very, very small slice of the SharePoint integration architecture, which is new in SQL Server 2012. So let's start there. Now, in SQL Server, in previous releases of SQL Server, reporting services integrated with SharePoint, but we were really just another application server, and we were not integrated with the overall SharePoint shared service application model. Now, in SQL Server 2012, we've fully integrated with the SharePoint shared service model, and that essentially allows an IT admin to have a much easier time administering reporting services within the context of their broader SharePoint 2010 deployment. So we're fully a shared service, and you'll see that reflected when we talk about the actual architecture slides in a second. We have improved ability to do communication and authentication. We essentially use WCF to communicate between the web front end and the middle tier service. We've actually done a lot of work in this release around performance. And that's very important because we found in previous releases this was a major reason why people were hesitant to move to SharePoint. We've actually achieved parity in this release for operational reporting performance in SharePoint and native mode. And we did that, of course, by making SharePoint mode significantly faster. And it's to the point where if you had evaluated SQL Server 2008 R2 SharePoint integration with reporting services, you will see about a 30 to 60% increase in performance when you deploy those same reports to SQL Server 2012 reporting services. I think that's just going to be a huge selling point for this integration capability. And lastly, we've made an easier deployment. So we integrate as a shared service. That's all handled by setup. And we use a built-in scale-out and load balancing that's built into SharePoint, so you don't have to deploy any kind of hardware load balancers or plan for that at the middle tier service. So it's actually going to be a very nice and easy experience for IT administrators. So now let's take a look at a little bit about the architecture. So overall, the architecture does not look very much different from previous releases. We have a web front-end component, and we have a reporting services add-in for SharePoint 2010 that we have to install on each one of the web front-end pieces. And we have a middle-tier component, which is the reporting services shared service application, which is where we actually run reports and run alerts. Now, of course, we have some databases underneath that. All reports that you publish to SharePoint are actually stored in the SharePoint content database, and most of our configuration settings for reporting services are stored in the SharePoint config database. On the back-end side, our shared service has its own databases to allow reporting and alerting. Now, on the front end, let's talk a little bit about how this picture looks for alerting specifically. So we have the Alert Designer and the Alert Manager. These are Silverlight-based tools. They're downloaded from the SharePoint web front end and run in the client browser. And they connect to the web front end where we have a WCF service. And then that WCF service connects to the back end to do most of the heavy lifting around designing and executing alerts. So now let's dive in a little bit deeper. Now, most of these boxes you will have seen before in previous versions. We haven't really changed them a lot, and I'm not going to talk to them to a large degree. What I wanted to focus on here is when we look at the web front end and the SharePoint app server tiers, where does alerting fit in? So first, let's talk about the web front end. So first, alerting has a web service on the front end, which is a WCF web service. The important thing for you to understand about this web service is that it is internal only. We have not chosen to expose this for application authors to create alerts. So when you look at the alerting that we have in SQL Server 2012, what we really have is we have a solution that allows information workers to create alerts for themselves. we do not have a ISV or developer platform for creating self-service alerts. Okay? So the second piece is in support of the overall picture. We have a couple of things on the back end. We have a WCF endpoint for our shared service and an interactive service. What this allows us to do is this allows us to manage and create alerts. The interactive service is the piece that's going to provide all of the preview data that you have in alerts. It's going to be able to create the alerts based off of the rules that you've defined. So whenever you press save or you press edit within the alerting experience, you'll be interacting with this web WCF endpoint and the alerting shared service. In addition, we have the alerting runtime. This is the component that actually orchestrates the execution of alerts so that you actually then eventually receive email. So this is the one that's going to be running the reports, going and evaluating all the rules, and it's going to be then it's going to be sending the email messages. Now, in support of all of this, we have added a new database to your deployment. Now, this is the report server alerting database. It is a peer to the report server catalog DB and report server temp DB, and exists on that same SQL server. This is a database where all of the alerts are going to be processed, and it's important because this database is going to have slightly different load characteristics as opposed to the other databases we have. This one is going to be much more memory centric, and we'll talk about that later. So now let's take a look at a little bit about when you create an alert, what's actually happening underneath the covers. So let's talk about it in terms of sort of two flows. The first is the alert creation and editing flow. So first, a user runs a report, and that's in the report viewer. Once they view the report, they're able to launch the alert designer. The alert designer will then go and get the data from the report, and once you've finished designing the alert, it will save that as an alert definition. And that alert definition is then saved into the alerting database. At the same time, a SQL Server agent job is created so that, based off of whatever schedule you created, and that will then later pick up and cause us to run the alert. Now let's take a look at the actual flow when that SQL agent job tells us it's time to go process an alert. So the first thing that will happen is the agent job will write in a message into an alert queue. The alert queue just simply tells us what are all of the alerts that have to be processed. An important aspect of our architecture is that we can scale out our middle tier service. What that means is multiple services can be reading from this queue and simultaneously be handling all of the alerts. And that allows you to increase the amount of load that the alerting capability can have. This architecture is the same as our existing subscription and scheduling architecture. So if you're familiar with those, you'll be able to quickly understand how alerting works. Now, when the alert is picked off that queue, we're going to have to do a number of pieces of work. First, we're going to have to get the data feed for the report. We'll talk a lot more about data feeds in part 3. When we get the data feed, what's essentially happening is we're running that report to get its latest data. Now, if you have a cache configured for that report, we'll read the values out of the cache. But if you don't, we're actually going to go and execute the report, execute the queries for that report at the underlying data source, go process the data, render it in this particular format, and then read that into the alerting database. Then what we will do is we will take those alert rules that you had created, and we're going to translate those into T-SQL queries, and we're going to execute those against the data feed. Next we're going to go and we're going to create an alert instance. And what this is this allows us to know, hey, this alert was created and this was the data that we had inside that alert. That's important. Remember when we talked about that feature that allows us not to spam you? So if the data did not change, we would not send you a duplicate message. Well, this alert instance is one of the capabilities that allows us to do that. And lastly, if the rules match, then we will send you a message. And so that message will then be sent to email through an SMTP server that you configure, and we'll send that out to the recipients. And that's the overall flow. So now you can see how you go from creating an alert all the way through to recipients receiving the email message for that alert. Wonderful. That concludes our part 2 of our self-service alerting talk. And really, we focused in this one more about the kind of nitty-gritty, right? We talked a lot about the feature set, what's there, a couple of things that are not there. We talked about the architecture and how it fits into the overall SharePoint integration. The SharePoint integration, I went over it incredibly quickly. There will be another talk that talks about that in detail. If you stay with us for part 3, you'll learn all about alerting for the IT admin, some key considerations, and we'll talk more about data feeds as part of the background material that'll help you understand alerting. So, one thing to really understand about self-service alerting is that when we decided to do this for SQL Server 2012, we really wanted to provide information workers a very proactive and responsive way to monitor the data that matters to them. And really, it's about helping information workers have a safety net to cope with information overload, to make sure that they don't miss any of the important data changes that affect their ability to succeed within their organization. The last thing is really about providing an experience for information workers that they're able to create alerts that suit their needs to help their own productivity and maybe the productivity of their work group. As of recording, the current release that you can play with is SQL Server 2012 RC0, and you have the link here. Hopefully by the time you're watching this, you'll be able to see the actual full final bits, and you'll be able to download them. If you'd like to get more information or send me feedback, feel free to use my blog. It's blogs.msdn.com/LUKASZP. With that, I'd like to thank you for staying through, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.